If you remember from your old college music theory training, the modes are derived from your basic major scale, and there are 7 modes. The first mode is called Ionian, built on your first scale step. The Dorian mode is built on the second scale step. The Phrygian mode is built on the third scale step. The Lydian mode is built on the fourth scale step. The Mixolydian mode is built on the fifth scale step. The Aeolian mode is built on the sixth scale step. And the Locrian mode is built on the seventh scale step. Even though all 7 modes are the C major scale I used, in jazz, we like to think of the use of each mode as an individual scale with its own function. Although the modes are based on the same notes as a major scale, they each function as a different key in their own right, and you can think of the starting note of each mode as the tonic or key note of the relative major scale. The way to look at this is that each mode functions as its own key area. For instance, D Dorian would be derived from C major and would be spelled D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. But if it were the B-flat Dorian scale, then it would be derived from the A-flat major scale and will be spelled B-flat C, D-flat, E-flat, F, G, A-flat, and B-flat. G Mixolydian would be derived from the C major scale, which is G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but E-flat Mixolydian would be derived from the A-flat major scale, which is spelled E-flat, F, G, A-flat, B-flat, C, D-flat, and E-flat. Now coming up, you'll see how the modes of the major scale function. The first scale step, Ionian, is really good for tonic major chords. The second scale step, which is Dorian, works well with minor chords, often functioning as a 2 minor. The third scale step, Phrygian, works well with minor chords functioning as 3 minor. The fourth scale step, Lydian, and again, major chords will function very well as 4 major here. The fifth scale step is good with dominant chords functioning as a 5/7. The Aeolian mode, which is the sixth scale step, is used for minor chords functioning as 6 minor. The seventh scale step, Locrian, works good with half-diminished chords functioning as a 7 minor 7 flat 5 or as a 2 minor 7 flat 5 in a minor key. Okay, now let's look at an example of a song where we can use these modes. Since this song is in C major, this would be a pretty straightforward way of just attaching the appropriate mode to each chord based on the fact that it is in C major. For instance, you have your C major 7 for the Ionian mode, first scale step. Your D minor 7 would work with the Dorian mode, second scale step. The F major 7 would work well with the Lydian mode, fourth scale step. And the G7 would work really well with the Mixolydian mode, the fifth scale step. Technically, you could just use a C major scale for every chord, but there would be some instances where certain notes would not sound just right. For instance, on the F major 7, you would have the tritone F to be natural. It is often important and useful for chord notes to fall on strong beats. By starting each chord with the appropriate mode, the song will sound better. Each chord can be associated with the mode based on its root note. Now, if you notice with the next example, I've got the modes written out in this little song. The modal method that I use most and teach is to treat most minor chords in major keys as 2 minor 7 or Dorian. I think of all dominant 7th and 9th chords, etc., as a 5-7 or Mixolydian. If all of the chords in the song are in the key of the song, then you could just use the chords as is and use them as they fall in the song. If the song has chords not in the key of the song, and then calling all 2 minor 7 chords as Dorian and all 5-7 chords as Mixolydian works very well. Occasionally you will have notes that may sound a little odd because some of the notes may not fit the chord exactly. These are called avoid notes. What you can do is just simply skip them or play them like filler notes between the beats or as grace notes. Now here's the example of Blue Bossa with all the modes written out for your convenience. So, starting to get the picture, this technique will work in a very large percentage of the chords. The few chords that will not work with this formula I will be covering in later chapters. For the diminished chords, I use D Locrian, which is the 7th mode of the E-flat scale. Okay, coming up now is another example, and this one is called Meditation. And as you can see in the example, I have the modes written out for you. And these are just suggestions, of course. But by doing this, now all of a sudden you have an idea what scales go with what chords. Yes, on some of these you could use blues scales. Depending upon the style, sometimes blues scales are not what I would call appropriate. Not in every situation. If you notice, in measure 16, I use the G whole tone scale because of the G7 sharp 5. We will be covering this later also. What makes jazz so interesting is a vast array of chord patterns. Typical jazz tunes are usually made up of tons and tons of what I call 2-5-1 progressions in various keys outside the original key of the song, and meditation is no different. In classical theory, we would call this a temporary tonalization in other key areas. For jazz, using a modal system and calling all 2 minor 7 chords as Dorian and 5-7 chords as Mixolydian makes it a whole lot easier for it. The key here is to remember that this technique is literally the tip of the iceberg, but it will give you a good start at improvising. Okay, coming up now is another classic tune called Mac the Knife. And as you can see, again, I have all the modes written out for you. And again, you could use your own discretion when you're doing this, because some of these chords you might want to use blues scale, some you could use a modal system, and as you learn in the next upcoming chapters, you're going to have a whole variety of techniques you could employ depending upon the style and the situation. Again, I think by now this should be making sense to you. Once you have identified which scale goes to which chord, then it becomes more academic. Once you have memorized the scales, you are on your way. In being a classically trained musician, you probably memorized them a long time ago. All right, got one last example for this chapter. It's a song called Corcovado. And again, I have written out modal suggestions for you. So you can take a second to scan it, look at it. I deliberately use this last example because some of the chords do not work as well with the modal method, and/or you may have more than one choice. The G-sharp diminished chord in measure 3 is one of these. It was originally classified as an A-flat diminished chord, but by changing it to a G-sharp diminished chord, then I was able to classify it as a G-sharp Locrian chord to A major, which worked out just fine for me. In measure 25, I decided to call the chord F Dorian in E-flat major because of the A-flat in the melody line. Typically, what I do is use both the blues and modal method when improvising. This way I have a lot more options to work with. Now that you have an idea how all this works, as you work through these examples and other practice songs, feel free to continue to work on developing your musical line by starting with your basic motive and working through the developmental process I explained earlier. When you purchase this course, you were also given a link to download the backing tracks for the songs from my website, jazzbook.com, spelled jazzbk.com. On my website, you will find the PDF music for the practice songs, as well as the backing tracks for them. I have also included any supplementary material for your convenience.